Hello everyone, welcome to another video of my British Chess Championships finals. In this game I'm playing Harry Grieve, who is an FM. We've played once before and I believe I was white and it was a very hard fought draw. In this game I was on 2.5, he was on 2, so I was floated down to play him. And as black I'd prepared a line against him. He often plays the Torre attack with bishop g5, so I had the plan of e6 against his d4, and after knight f3 trying to play bishop g5 I was going to prevent it with bishop e7. Now he plays e4 a fair amount too, but I thought that I could get an interesting line of the French because his usual moves indicate that he'll play knight bd2. Then, after knight f6, his pawn can't stay on e4, so bishop d3 is okay. That would transpose into some other lines that I know very well, and e5 would go into a sort of classical Tarrasch French, where after bishop d3, black tries to go for the d4 pawn, undermining it. White tries to keep a pawn on d4. Attack the pawn yet again, but white is now holding it with enough pieces so can afford to castle. And here, even though queen b6 is the main line, a5 has become fairly popular, and my move, g5, has also gained in popularity. I believe this is now maybe the second most popular move, and it causes white some headaches here. There's a few lines especially. After queen e2, black has to move g4, forcing the knight away, and then I believe rook g8 is actually the strongest move on the board. h5 is also interesting, as is pawn takes pawn on d4, but I was hoping for this line, where white grabs h7, then puts the bishop back, and here I can capture on d4 and undermine the white centre. So we may not have got this exact position, but this kind of thing is something I was hoping for. In the game, though, he was able to sidestep my prep early on. So we got to this position. The first few moves have been a success. And then he played e5, which does make my bishop on e7 look a bit silly. And also my knight on g8 can no longer really move anywhere except for h6. So the plus side to this is that black's bishop on e7 can be useful in playing g5 in the future, but also stopping bishop g5. And we get a very similar type of position, but this time queen b6 is played. He castles, white's got what they want. And then after bishop d7, this isn't the most accurate move because I believe I meant to take on d4. But if white plays a3 here, then I believe I actually do have at least equality. He took, which is the most critical line. I took back with the bishop, and then b4. So here, bishop to e7 is considered to be the best move by the computer, and I believe I have studied this line once. Rather unusual bishop e7 has kind of lost black a tempo. But here, I chose bishop f8, and the reason is I want to put my knight on g8 to e7. Which means that my bishop on f8 no longer has a future on the main diagonal, so I have to instead improvise a bit and play the g7 pawn up to g6. Here though, possibly a6 is stronger, stopping white going b5 and a5 to a6 with their pawn, which is what happened in the game. But after a6, I was a bit concerned about b5 because it's possible my rook on a8 might be a bit weak in the future. Probably not correct though, maybe a6 is the best move. But I was trying to quickly develop the bishop and castle. So white gets this wing pawn attack. I don't really see what else to do. If I play b6, then knight a3 to b5 can come in, attacking my queen, heading for d6. If I go b5, I lose the pawn. And if I leave the pawn there, again, black can go knight a3 to b5. So I ended up capturing, making white spend a move, taking the pawn back. And they take with the rook. Bishop g7, aiming at the pawn. and white correctly defends it. And I now have just enough time to castle and start setting up my queenside play. Knight bd2, this might have been its only mistake in the game actually. And knight d2 is perfectly reasonable because it improves the knight and puts it in the centre of the board. But the knight was doing a job guarding the c3 pawn. And because the c3 pawn and by extension the b4 pawn are somewhat less protected, this now allowed me to essentially equalise with my next turn. Can you see the move I did as black to get a roughly equal position? So my main problem is the e7 knight. It wants to come to d5, and I was thinking maybe I'd have to go to c8 or b and then to b6, trying to activate it. But in the end I thought knight d5 looks correct, so therefore d4. And then white has some difficult problems to solve. If they play b5, I will capture on c3. Both our knights are simultaneously being attacked. And then if they take my knight, attacking my bishop, I counter by taking their own knight, attacking their rook. So then we have to trade. I am up a pawn, but this pin looks a little nasty, so I had to calculate a bit more here. So queen b7 aiming at the rook and the knight, and the computer gives queen e3 as being best. I had not anticipated this move. I'd thought bishop e2, but forgot their rook on a6 is being attacked, so bishop e2 is not ideal. And then here I can capture, forcing white to damage their pawns, and even though they have the bishop pair, d5 is an excellent outpost for my knight. I can also take their bishop on f4 anytime I like. And this gives black maybe even a slight edge, but equality at the worst. So this was all good. Instead, white did not play b5, they played knight takes d4. I captured, and they took back. Then knight d5, so I'm aiming at the bishop on f4 and the b4 pawn. Both can't be saved, so bishop g5 activating the bishop was chosen by my opponent. Now I took b4, winning back the pawn, rook a3, and it seems that my move is one of the best, if not the best, and it's capturing the bishop. Even though I have excellent prospects for my knight if it goes to d5, I do want to get rid of white's light squared bishop because it can cause lots of problems. And their remaining bishop is a so-called bad bishop because their pawns in the centre are on the same colour as itself. The good thing about it though is it's stopping me playing rook d8. And here I missed the best move by a long way. My instinct told me to play it, but my tactical mind failed me a bit here. I wanted to trade queens. That was my plan. Then my a pawn should prove to be better than the d pawn, and my two bishops should give me a slight edge if I can get rid of the queens. So my tactical brain thought play rook f8, and then the idea is to go queen c2, where the queens are likely to get traded. The best move though is simply playing bishop c6, and then putting it on d5 in the future, then playing rook c8. And it's a huge difference, even though the computer doesn't at first realise. After the game I was shocked to see the computer said that my move was fine, but then when you leave it on long enough it then realises the mistake. So here, after white played knight e4, I had thought that black was absolutely fine here because of queen c2, attacking queen and rook, and if white wants to avoid the trade of queens, queen f3 has to be done. But then I thought, okay, bishop c6, and the problem white has is that I'm attacking the rook on d3, the knight, and also lined up with the queen. So white doesn't really have anything like knight f6 check or rook c3 or any of these other moves, because tactically none of them work. They'll lose material. What had I missed? What move did white play here that gives me a completely lost position? white played the excellent knight f6 check. And I then realised I cannot take the knight, which I had been planning to do, because white will take with their queen. Even though it drops their rook, I am utterly powerless after bishop h6, and I get checkmated on g7 next turn. I didn't allow the mate, but then I realised I was in serious trouble. And if I play king h8, which is the materialistic move, holding the h-pawn, white is completely winning. Queen h3, and I have to go h5 to prevent queen h7 mate. g4, and my best attempt is bishop b5. If white gets greedy and grabs the h5 pawn, it gets very, very complicated, but I can take the rook with my queen, and I think I'm okay in that position. So instead, rook g3 I think would have been played, and I simply don't see a way for me to get out of this. Pawn takes pawn, then pawn takes g6, and I'm getting mated, I think. If I take the knight, white can even grab the pawn. And again, I just don't have enough time. If I take the bishop as well, they take on g6, and then the queen comes in to checkmate me with the help of the g6 pawn. So I played the only move left, which didn't lose straight away. I played king f8, losing my pawn, but hoping that after we reached this position, that his queen is being tied down to his d3 rook. I have the two bishops, maybe I can get the a-pawn, or maybe my rooks can activate onto, say, b2 or b1, and I can counterattack. So after queen h3, I don't have much else to do, rook b8. And then, excellent move from my opponent, queen h7. And I suddenly realised that all hope was lost. If I take the rook, can you see the way that white can checkmate me? So, all forcing moves, queen g8, check, king e7 forced, then double check, knight d5. Whenever it's double check, you must move the king. King d7 only move, and then queen f7 checkmate. Over, it's lost. I did not play this, but maybe I should have done. I spent a while looking at this, and eventually realised bishop a4 was maybe the only move to keep me in the game. He continued with queen g8 like before, and here I believed that double check was going to happen again, and then I'd prepared something where I was still losing, but I had a chance to maybe complicate in the future. But instead, just the simple knight to e4, and I realised it was over. I have to move the king, more or less, and then f7 drops. Then rook c3 comes, and I am losing my queen. So king d5, he took, I took back, I'm on the brink of resignation, and then he essentially forced me into resignation with knight d6, winning my rook on top of being material up anyway. So I resigned, I think next move, and that was the end of the game. So Harry Grieve really proved his tactical abilities by winning in such style, but I shouldn't have given him the chance to. I should have played that bishop c6 move, which prevented knight to e4 instead of my rook c8 and then queen c2 plans. So very well played from him. I have just looked at the pairings for round number 6, and as I'm still on 2.5 after 5 games, I hoped that all the Grandmasters and FIDE Masters and the like have started to get a plus score. So thought maybe I could play somebody who is in the bottom half of the field. I am literally on the 50% mark. I'm 19th out of, I think, 38 or 37 players. However, unfortunately for me, there's just enough very strong players on 50% that I am playing Grandmaster Mark Hebden tomorrow. So that will be a very interesting game. We've never played Rapid Play or Standard before, so it should be fun. I will of course do a video on that match, whatever the outcome is, hoping for at least a draw to keep me on 50% and not to drop below the halfway mark of the tournament. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video and see you next time. Bye.